Doctor Who is well known for its constant changing and evolving, even though the main example of this change is the regular regeneration of the main character. The most common change is actually the companions that travel through time and space with the Doctor. Long before William Hartnell handed the main role over to Patrick Troughton, companions like Susan, Barbara, Ian, Vicky and Stephen had come and gone. However, with the original run of Doctor Who, a lot of these companion departures were often rushed and a bit flaccid. Look no further than the departure of Dodo, who just disappears halfway through a serial.
She says she's feeling much better and she'd like to stay here in London and she sent you her love.
Or how about Leela, who decides to stay on Gallifrey because she's suddenly in love with a guy she's maybe only spoken to for about 10 minutes. When Billie Piper decided to leave Doctor Who at the end of Series 2, showrunner Russell T Davies wanted to make sure her departure was an epic, dramatic moment, since having Rose simply walk away from the Doctor wouldn't work for their characters. This led to him writing the climactic Series 2 finale, Army of Ghosts and Doomsday. But is this dramatic story pitting Cybermen vs Daleks a deserved farewell for the first companion of Doctor Who's modern life?
Are you gonna stay with me?
Forever.
The titular ghosts from Army of Ghosts are a really good concept. I love how it's something the Doctor doesn't even know how to explain at first.
He's not happy when I know more than him, is he?
It's also a nice touch that the ghosts are now just part of everyday life, with humanity just having accepted them as normality. This acceptance is effectively shown with the TV, using the same narrative framing tool as the Slitheen two-parter and the Christmas Invasion. It gives a bigger sense of scale with such a small and short scene, doing a lot of world building by simply showing the impact of the ghosts through the news and pop culture. It all helps to build up a good mystery around the ghosts. There's a nice little bit of dramatic irony since we're shown that Torchwood is responsible for the ghosts, but the Doctor has to find out for himself, which he does by setting up a fun little contraption to trap a ghost and examine it. It's good to see him fiddle around with gadgets, showing his scientifically creative side, rather than relying on the sonic screwdriver. However, before the Doctor can properly examine the trapped ghost, Torchwood notice and shut things down to stop him. I really like Torchwood in this episode. I think it's presented really well. It's a really good concept and it totally makes sense for an organisation like this to exist in the universe of Doctor Who. I do appreciate how they differentiate it from UNIT by making it much more bureaucratic with a sinister agenda. Visually it's brilliant, with a great contrast between the clean white office at the top of the tower to the more industrial hangar below. This hangar filled with alien technology kind of reminds me of Area 51 from Indiana Jones, making Torchwood Tower even more interesting because it's basically Area 51 in the middle of central London. I just think it's great. It's also a nice touch to have Torchwood personnel being almost fans of the Doctor in a way, highlighted by Yvonne's joy at seeing the TARDIS and her excitement to meet the Doctor since the entire organisation was set up because of him. Even though she's a pretty terrible person, I low-key love Yvonne, but maybe that just says a lot about my taste in women. I find Yvonne a very interesting three-dimensional character who isn't blindly evil, she's just doing what she believes in. It's her job. It shows the naivety of organisations like Torchwood, who actually believe what they're doing is right, even though they cause more harm than good, which is what Yvonne realises as she's about to be converted, since it's Torchwood's fault that this is happening. She goes through a good character journey in this two-parter, eventually redeeming herself by overriding her cyber programming, and stopping the Cybermen from reaching the Doctor and Rose. It's a nice, subtle arc that adds a lot to the overall human heart of the story. Despite what Tumblr would probably tell you, the main heart of the story isn't the Doctor or Rose, it's actually Jackie Tyler. Jackie has one of her best outings in this story, really showing the average person's view from normal present day Earth. The opening of Army of Ghosts is a good way to show how the Doctor and Rose's lifestyle has become a normal part of Jackie's life at this point, showing a really domestic approach. There's a fantastic scene between her and Rose in the TARDIS where she challenges Rose on her life with the Doctor, since when Jackie dies, Rose will have no reason to come back to Earth. She gives a really underrated speech about how much Rose has changed.
She's not Rose Tyler. Not anymore. She's not even human.
Jackie is a prominent part of Army of Ghosts since the Doctor accidentally pulls her out of the TARDIS and has to pass her off as Rose, creating a fun little dynamic. Unfortunately, she becomes a bit lost in the shuffle in Doomsday, although there is the standout scene where she meets the parallel universe Pete. It's so well shot and acted, really making you feel the emotion of the moment since they have both lost the parallel version of the other, but thanks to the Doctor they have a second chance with each other. It's such a fantastic moment in an otherwise overly stuffed episode. This two-parter is so filled to the brim, it's incredible. Army of Ghosts has multiple big elements ingrained within it, including the Void and the mysterious Void ship inside Torchwood. I love how they build up both of these, especially how the Doctor explains the Void itself, really making you fear it due to the absence of anything. It's also great how he explains the cracks in dimensions, using cracked glass as a really effective metaphor for how reality itself can shatter at any moment. Like the glass. It feels like such a strong Doctor moment. The sudden spiral out of control is a brilliant climax to the episode, with the cyber control Torchwood employees going rogue and activating the ghost shift, with the Void ship also starting to activate as all of our characters stand helplessly. Even though the Cybermen being in this episode was no secret, the reveal of the ghosts being Cybermen is such a great reveal, seeing them break into houses to show the effects on the streets to give it a better sense of scale. However, this brilliant part of the episode is overshadowed by the actual cliffhanger, which sees the Daleks appear out of the Void ship. I absolutely adore this cliffhanger because it's so unexpected. Army of Ghosts spent the whole time building the Cybermen up as the big bad of the story, but then it suddenly hits you with the Daleks being the ones inside the Void ship, even though they were all wiped out in the Series 1 finale, so it's a real shock. The Daleks in this episode are an elite faction called the Cult of Skaro, and the Cult of Skaro are really great villains. They're such an inventive and great direction to take the Daleks, keeping the monsters fresh by introducing a new concept for them. They're almost a spiritual successor to the human factor Daleks in Evil of the Daleks, but I really like how they're done here, with names and imaginations purposefully ingrained for the sole purpose of being better military tacticians. Names and imaginations break the rules of the Daleks, but the show accommodates for this by specifying their importance to their race, since they're above the Emperor himself, which is a nice little link back to the Series 1 finale. Speaking of the Series 1 finale, I love that Rose uses it to intimidate the Cult of Skaro, because she destroyed the Emperor, along with her using her knowledge of the Daleks as a bargaining tool to stay alive. I like this a lot because it shows how she's grown as a companion, especially when you compare it to her feeble attempt to do the same in the Christmas invasion. The Daleks having a fear of the Doctor really does a lot to sell you on how bad the Time War must have been for the Daleks to be terrified of him.
5 million Cybermen, easy. One Doctor? Now you're scared.
It's also great when the Doctor intimidates and taunts the Daleks with his brilliant little speech that shows his dark and threatening side. I think both the Daleks and Cybermen are presented well as huge threats in this episode, meaning it's even more effective when they come together in a huge battle. It's easy to forget that Doomsday is the first ever Doctor Who episode to pit the Daleks and Cybermen against each other. In fact, they only even appeared in the same story once before in the 1983 special, The Five Doctors, but that doesn't really count because they didn't really share any screen time. For years, fans had fantasized about these two titans going head to head, so Doomsday is a great piece of fan service to finally execute the idea. Even though it's sassy and camp, I love the first confrontation between the two races, with them trading verbal jabs at one another. It's also a good little touch to not show the usual X-ray when the Cybermen are exterminated, because there's nothing to show underneath their thick armour. The all-out war in London is fantastic, showing you the view from the trenches, feeling epic as the Cybermen attack the humans before later teaming up with them to fight the Daleks. The uneasy alliance between humans and Cybermen is a nice element, creating some really good visuals. And just as a side note, I simply adore seeing people uselessly shooting at the Daleks. It's always a great visceral visual during the Russell T Davies era. I do wish we got to see more of this this battle between the three species, because the episode is too stuffed and it falls to the wayside due to everything else going on. The story could have worked a lot better as a three-parter, with the opening of the Genesis arc being the cliffhanger to part 2. I really do like the concept of the Genesis arc. It's built up really well with a great little mystery around it, since it's made by the Time Lords, but even the Doctor doesn't know what it is. The fact it can only be activated by the Time Traveller's touch is a great link all the way back to Dalek in Series 1, similar to how the Daleks once again used their sink plunger arm to viciously kill someone, leaving him as a skeletal corpse after extracting his brainwaves. The slow build to the opening of the Genesis arc is wonderful, since the tension continues to mount until there's the horrifying realization that it's a prison ship bigger on the inside, leading to that incredible visual of fleets of Daleks escaping the Genesis arc and descending upon London. It creates such an urgent feel and builds higher stakes than the Parting of the Ways, because this time we're in the eye of the storm and see the view from the trenches, if you will. In the Parting of the Ways we only saw a map of the Earth being attacked, but here we see the people on the ground being killed and we experience it firsthand. The Cybermen are a weird one in this story. They're the main threat in Army of Ghosts, but they kind of get overshadowed by the Daleks in Doomsday. Even though the Cybermen don't fully appear until the end of Army of Ghosts, you know they're there, because Torchwood has already been infiltrated by an advanced guard, who partially converts some Torchwood employees, especially one that looks strangely familiar for some reason. Not sure where I've seen her before. Even though Gareth and Adiola are glorified extras who are just there to get converted, I do like how they have a brief humanizing moment, which makes them feel like actual people, so you feel bad for them when they get partially converted. The Cybermen do feel really intimidating throughout this two-parter. It's great when they conquer the world and march into homes and TV studios, showing how terrifying they can be. It's also good that they show how Cybermen have evolved to the point where the Cyber Leader now gets downloaded to a different Cyberman, rather than having a designated special Cyberman for it. It just makes more sense for the concept of the monster. One of the best things about this two-parter is how the stakes are raised because the presence of the Cybermen is dangerous enough, but the appearance of the Daleks makes it an almost insurmountable threat. Not only does the presence of Daleks and Cybermen raise the stakes of the story, so does the presence of people from Pete's world. It's always great to see Mickey, but the fact that he's back in this world really sells you on the importance of the situation, because he was supposed to be forever trapped in Pete's world. But his presence, along with Jake and Pete, shows how fractured the barrier between worlds has become. These stakes are furthered when the Doctor goes to Pete's world and we see the dark and derelict Torchwood building, along with a world that is dying because of all the dimension hopping. It creates more stakes and consequence to the hopping, along with giving Pete a good motivation to seek out the Doctor and get him to fix things. The scene between the two is really well acted by both David Tennant and Sean Dingwall. However, even though the stakes are really high, the climax of the episode feels a bit flat, and kind of ends up like a bit of a cop-out because all of the Cybermen and Daleks are sucked back into the void, since writer Russell T Davies had kind of written himself into a corner with them. It's a bit of a Deus Ex Machina, but it's actually somewhat justified because it's kind of seeded throughout. All through the two-parter, the Doctor keeps putting on a pair of red and blue 3D glasses to examine things, which is a great visual that has become deservedly iconic. However, he finally reveals that they allow him to see something he calls void stuff, which covers everything that crosses between the two universes. This means that by opening the void back up, all the Daleks and Cybermen will be sucked back in and the void will close. It's done well enough that the ending doesn't feel like an insulting Deus Ex Machina, and the final scenes are emotional enough to make you forgive the cop-out. As has become an iconic scene of the Russell T Davies era, all of the Daleks and Cybermen are sucked back into the void, but Rose finds herself falling in until she's saved by Pete in a moment that makes no sense, because they both should have been sucked in. But I digress. Rose becomes trapped in the parallel world, separated from the Doctor by force. A lot of people nowadays absolutely despise this ending, but let me play devil's advocate for a minute. Even during series 1, the Doctor and Rose had been built up in a way that their separation would have to be tragic. In the Parting of the Ways, we see how much Rose will do to avoid a life without the Doctor, so it wouldn't have worked to have her just leave him in Doomsday. They had to be forced apart. Even though I don't care about the romantic relationship relationship between the pair, I do find Rose's departure emotional because she's the very first character we meet in series 1. She was the first audience surrogate of New Who and had 2 full series. The regular viewing audience who weren't fans before 2005 had developed a strong connection to this character, and they related to her a lot, so she needed a dramatic send-off that made them emotional, which I find works because the final scene between the two is so well acted and well scored, really nailing that intended effect. The whole hook of the cold open saying Rose dies sets up a great ongoing plot thread, but it turns out to have more asterisks next to it than Liverpool's Premier League win, meaning it's basically clickbait, but that doesn't take away from the emotion of the ending. I really do like Army of Ghosts and Doomsday. I think it's a suitable send-off story for Rose, and the hook of Daleks vs Cybermen is a good use of fan wish fulfillment, because the story actually justifies it, rather than being like a kid bashing some action figures together. It gives a satisfying payoff to the Torchwood plotline by making it completely different to the Bad Wolf arc the year before. Torchwood is brilliantly realised, and Yvonne is a really well written, 3-dimensional character who is morally grey, rather than some cackling evil villain. David Tennant and Billie Piper are both on top form throughout this story, making you really feel the bond between the Doctor and Rose, which is what makes the ending work so well. Even though there are so many things you can easily nitpick from these episodes, the whole look and feel of the story is so strong. Overall, I'd give this 2-parter a solid A ranking on the Series 2 tier list. It suffers from a bit too much going on, but it delivers well on its premise and setup, along with having an incredible music score. There's a great, subtle variation of Song for 10 at the beginning, and then there's the Torchwood theme which I absolutely adore, along with the brilliant, oppressive and tragic track Doomsday, which really sells the emotion of the ending. It's one of those stories where you really notice the incredible talent of composer Murray Gold. Army of Ghosts is paced really well with the great mysteries of the ghosts and the Void Ship, before delivering one of the best cliffhangers of modern Doctor Who, which Doomsday follows up with an entertaining, high-stakes story. All in all, it's a really enjoyable story that wraps up Series 2 well, including a great little sting at the end, setting up the Christmas special with an interesting cliffhanger, and leading into the special really well, turning the Runaway Bride into an epilogue of sorts to Series 2.
What? Who are you? Where am I? What? What the hell is this place?
And I'd like to give a special thank you to my gold level patrons, Steph McNever Miller and Mark Hip Old Guy Taylor. Thank you a lot for your support.